Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You cannot be gay and Muslim. But let me explain why, because the reasons may not be what you're thinking and they may not be what you've heard before. You cannot be Muslim and gay because there's no such thing as being gay. There is such thing as being Muslim. That's a religion, that's a belief, that's practice, that's a set of morals and values, a set of manners and behaviors. There's a history there, there's substance there, there's a basis for an identity. But being a man who feels the desire to have sexual intercourse with another man is none of these things. It's not an identity, it's an urge. LGBT activists in the West wanted to be able to act upon that urge without being stigmatized by the society, so they inflated the meaning and importance of that urge into being an identity. So yes, the beginning of their propaganda was when they turned having the unnatural desire for sodomy into a state of being, like a race, religion, or ethnicity. They turned an act into an identity. Now, by doing so, they could claim on the one hand that criminalizing sodomy was discriminatory. But on the other hand, they trapped men who struggled with this abnormal desire into defining themselves by it, into thinking that this desire was who they are, as opposed to it just being an act which they felt a desire to commit. Now, if it's who you are, well, obviously the healthy thing is for a person to learn to accept their identity. So the men who fought against this urge began to feel that they were fighting against their own selves, rather than what they were actually doing, which was fighting for themselves against a desire that they wished they didn't have. So instead of helping these men fight the temptation, LGBT activists devastatingly undermined their fight by convincing them that this temptation was their identity, and indeed that this temptation was genetically programmed into their nature. But as Muslims, let's be clear, we are talking about an act and the desire to commit that act. And it is a desire that results from and exacerbates a staggering number of psychological, emotional, and mental disorders. And it is an act that causes an almost innumerable number of strange and ugly health problems, sickness, and disease. More than half of the men who habitually commit this act will contract HIV by the age of 40. This is not an act that is consistent with nature, so don't let LGBT activists confuse you about it. They do not care about your health, your happiness, or your soul. They are exclusively interested in gratifying their sexual urges without stigma or judgment from society, no matter how many men get sick, no matter how many men suffer depression and mental breakdowns, no matter how many men kill themselves, no matter how many men die from AIDS or monkeypox or whatever other disease may be developed through performing this act. They do not care about you. So if you are a Muslim and you're suffering this urge, know that you are not gay, because that's not an actual thing. You are a Muslim. That is your identity. That is what and who you are. And you are like any other Muslim who grapples with temptation. Zina, after all, is also enormously unhealthy and risky and results in a multitude of emotional, psychological, and mental traumas and disorders. And habitually committing zina or feeling the desire to do so, that's not an identity. It's an urge and it's an act, and we as Muslims fight that urge and refrain from that act. We, the Muslims, are the ones who understand you, who care about you, who want the best for you, and who can help you. And we, the Muslims, all of us, are cautioned against and warned about protecting our private parts from committing forbidden acts. Doesn't matter what that act is or with whom it is committed. Look around you, and you'll see that anyone who is involved in the Muslim world in LGBT activism, they are all, without exception, sycophants of the West. They worship the West, they think that the West is superior, and they think that by imitating the West, that makes them superior. You will not see people of knowledge among their ranks, scholars, imams, righteous people, or even people who can actually relate to their own culture and heritage. You will only see people who are aping the West, imitating the West, trying to win the approval of the West. That's all that you will see among LGBT activists in the Muslim world. They are already estranged from Islam, they are estranged from their culture, they're estranged from their history and their heritage. But look, Western civilization is characterized by following their desires and then constructing rationales for doing so. They do not care about what is moral or right. They manufacture arguments and justifications for doing whatever they desire to do. And that is why they are the most medicated, drug addicted, depressed, suicidal, homicidal, and miserable population in the world. And the men among them who give in to the temptation to commit sodomy suffer these disorders more than anyone else. Don't listen to them and let this happen to you. Do not accept their rationales, do not accept their narratives. A desire is not an identity. Sodomy is not a culture or a biological nature. Islam is your fitrah. Being an obedient servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, being a Muslim, that is your identity, even if LGBTQ activists dislike it. Jazakumullahu khairan wa assalamu alaikum.